your name, organization, and where you're based. Try to keep these quick, although it doesn't seem like we have too many people on the line. So if you do want to share a little bit about yourself, that's welcome as well, but no pressure. I think I'll start and then kick it to Leslie, who's going to be doing quite a bit of the overview of our research. So I'm Jessica Fermansky, and I am with Conservation International, working on our sustainable agriculture team. I focus specifically on palm oil and soy for the most part, but kind of globally as far as connecting the dots between our work on the ground and the markets work with companies and whatnot. Leslie, over to you.
As Jessica mentioned, I'm Leslie McLaughlin, and I sit on our sustainable food and agriculture team as well, supporting some of our major corporate partnerships, including Walmart. And that works in our commodities, usually palm oil and a few other commodities, as well as some of this research that I'm going to talk about today in jurisdictional approach.
Great. And Leslie's based in the office here in the US, as am I, but I'm actually getting ready to relocate to Singapore in about a month or two's time. So I will be on that side of the world going forward. And just to put a little bit of context, this is going to be a really fun, easy webinar. We want you guys to, no pressure on being formal. This is a picture of Leslie and I trying to get a selfie with the Eiffel Tower. Wait, where is it? There. As you can see, we totally butchered getting the Eiffel Tower in the picture, but these are your hosts for today, so we'll try to make it really fun and a good time. So
next time we'll get to the tower.
Yeah, next webinar we'll have an actual picture with something good in it other than just us. So let's go. I'm going to try to go through. Actually, I'm just going to open it up. If you guys want to jump in when you can. I think if I try to go through a list, it switches around on me. So please go for it. Introduce yourself, name, organization, and where you're based.
Is this for me?
Patrick Mallet from ISEAL. I'm looking at the sun just coming up in British Columbia in Canada. And at ISEAL, we work with sustainability standards.
Hi, my name is Valeria. I am working with the UNDP in Ecuador, and I work for the energy and sustainability team, and I'm working with a project that works with commodities here in Ecuador.
I'm Christian Schnier. I'm with the GIZ. I'm based in Germany, in Bonn, and we're implementing a jurisdictional approach in Ivory Coast, in Cote d'Ivoire, and in Indonesia.
Hey, yeah, I'm Johanna. I'm also with GIZ, also based in Bonn. I'm advising on deforestation-free supply chains, sustainable coffee, and fair trade.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pedro Amaro. I work at ProForest. I'm based in Brazil, and we work supporting big brands implement their responsible sourcing policies on soy, sugar, beef, palm oil, and cocoa.
Hello, I am Irebi Frimpong. I am working with UNDP in Ghana. I'm part of the Sustainable Development Cluster here in Ghana, and I work on climate finance as well as UNDP's Environmental Sustainability Program, which focuses on cocoa.
Hi, I am Barati. I am from Conservation International Indonesia. I'm a program manager in North Sumatra and working on sustainable palm oil initiative.
Hello everyone, my name is Rico Pratama Putra. You can call me Rico. I'm from WWF Indonesia. My position in National Technical for Sustainable Palm Oil Program in Indonesia. Thank you.
Right, I should go, I think. Hello, my name is Matthias. I'm the coordinator of this community, and I'm glad you all are here, and I'm based in Panama, but I'm originally from Paraguay.
All right. My name is Pascal Fabier. I work for UNDP. I'm leading the coordination of this green commodities community, in which you are all very welcome participants. So I'm glad to see you all here. And that's it.
I think Ronald, we still haven't heard from you.
Yeah, Ronald is running late, so maybe Jairo. Can you hear us, Jairo?
There we go.
Good morning or good evening. My name is Jairo. I work in the Costa Rica country office. I provide support to the National for Sustainable Production and Trade of Pineapple here in the country.
Great. I think, Ronald, are you able to do a quick intro?
No, he doesn't have audio.
Okay, perfect. Did we get everybody?
Yeah.
It's hard to tell. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. All right, so I'm trying to make this. First, welcome to Sourcing from Sustainable Landscapes and Deforestation-Free Jurisdictions. Quite a mouthful there. Today's focus is particularly on jurisdictional approaches, specifically one component of landscape approaches. We'll dive into that quite a bit in just a minute, but kind of a priority of mine is to really emphasize the fact that although this is a virtual workshop, which is a bit more designed to be interactive and engaging, the first part will be somewhat presentation heavy as Leslie goes through our research that we just completed. And actually we'll be able to send out a summary right after this webinar. So very excited to officially share that with you all. You know, as we're going through, we'll pause about midway for questions. But if you have questions, please use the chat box to send them. I will be monitoring them to make sure that we pull out any key questions, topics, themes, and whatnot to hopefully discuss further in the discussion and Q&A. But if not, also to set up a second webinar that does a bit more of a focus that we can really dig into, that's more workshop style and interactive, like the virtual workshops are really meant to be. Also, another heads up that this is pretty introductory as far as the topic, just to help establish the foundation of what a jurisdictional is and what we found in our findings. So while some of the information might be known, I encourage you to ask questions about this or provide your insight and input from your work. But the new information, please ask questions. It's pretty interesting. I think a lot of the thoughts around jurisdictionals is how to actually do one and implement. And so we dug into that from different perspectives of varying stakeholders. So I won't steal the thunder from Leslie. And I think just again, please use the chat box to provide your input and questions. I will be monitoring those and whatnot. And yeah, enjoy. I hope you guys find this this research interesting. Leslie, I'm gonna stop sharing and then hand it to you.
Okay. Great.
Cool.
So I'm trying to pick it up now.
No, you're fine. There we go.
So
and for those of you who,
sorry.
Oh, sorry. For those of you who joined a little late, we'd love for you to do an introduction maybe once we head into the discussion time, where we haven't forgotten about you, just I'm gonna dive into the information now. Sorry, Leslie.
No problem. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Great. So thanks again for the introduction, Jessica, and thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to chat with everyone. As Jess mentioned, the presentation, the front half is a little bit introductory, depending on where your level is, and it sounds like a lot of you all are implementing on jurisdictional initiatives already, so this may be a little basic. So I'll try and move through this part pretty quickly and get to more of the interesting findings. So jumping in, I think most of us know why we're here. We understand what an issue agricultural-driven deforestation is, and that we've seen, while major companies in food and agricultural supply chains have responded, making a lot of voluntary commitments to end deforestation associated with agriculture, like the New York Declaration on Forest, NDPE commitments, Consumer Goods Forum member commitments. These certainly are indicative of progress, but we're still struggling to address kind of the systemic issues behind agricultural-driven defor for a few reasons. And what we've landed on, kind of grouping those major reasons, would be the global demand for sustainable goods is still limited and prevents that market-only led progress is going to make the progress that we need to see here. The voluntary corporate commitments we see are largely from Western companies, which speaks to the absence of a significant market demand from Asian buyers that are not requiring adherence to sustainability criteria. If the majority of the global market for palm and soy was asking for sustainability, let alone willing to pay a premium, that might flow back to producers. We might be seeing more of market-driven progress at scale. Second, we see the voluntary certification approach is limited in scope by participating geographies and by impact in the natural variability, relying on capacity of auditors. Finally, the certification approach doesn't build in the fact of the need for government, the critical role government must play in regulating the use of natural resources in a country or in subnational landscapes through policy, enforcement, and engagement with stakeholders. So the jurisdictional approach is kind of built on these learnings and the recognition of these shortcomings, aiming to bridge both the market side with policy-based intervention, pulling government in a greater way to really increase impact on the ground. It really encourages governments and companies to work together alongside key landscape actors to work towards deforestation-free commodity production. We see that this approach really holds great potential, but it is still in its early stages of development. We're seeing pilots popping up everywhere, some more developed than others. And it is in times built on presumed needs of what the market and commodity buyers want, and looking at what could really encourage governments and commodity producing jurisdictions to really halt that deforestation and regulate it. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to share some insights from a research project that CI has conducted around jurisdictional approaches. This research was funded by the Walmart Foundation. We've been working on it for over the last year, and we, as Jess mentioned, have a summary report just this week that we're able to share that discusses a little bit more elaboration on our key findings, conclusions, and recommendations. And then the full report will be due out in the next 2 months. So specifically in this research, what we've taken a look at is the viability of jurisdictional approaches in the Indonesian palm oil and Brazilian soy markets. We conducted interviews with 2 of the key stakeholder groups, really key to the success of the approach, private sector and government. And then this also included conversations with companies along the supply chain from all different places, retailers, consumer goods, manufacturers, processors, traders, many of the major brands that you would recognize, as well as some local-based companies. Within government, we spoke with members of national, local, provincial bodies across relevant ministries and departments in Indonesia and Brazil, all with the goal to kind of better understand what are the incentives that bring folks to the table to engage in these, and what really keeps them there, sticking it out through the long haul to ensure that these initiatives not only get off the ground, but have the ability to scale. And we want to know what does it take to really make this work. So again, I think this is pretty familiar to everyone, but let's start with what we look at as just a general definition. We came through our research to define a jurisdictional approach as a type of integrated landscape approach, which aims to reconcile the competing social and economic environmental objectives, working within that political boundary. Of course, this includes the participation across stakeholders and sectors implemented within the government administrative boundary and with a form of government engagement as kind of our key addition that really makes it stand out as a jurisdictional approach, are the implemented within a political boundary, and then also requires a form of government engagement. So we leave it a little loose on what that engagement looks like, because I think you can get really into the weeds by defining what the engagement specifically needs to be, because as we know, these governments operate really differently in every country we're seeing this implemented. So also referencing another definition that we saw quite a bit, and that also captures the jurisdictional approach very well, is the Earth Innovation Institute definition, which just specifies a little bit more that it's designed to achieve a high level of government involvement. So again, we understand that definition and certainly respect it. We left out that high level of government involvement just to leave it a little nuanced and flexibility, and not let a definition really hinder or limit what we're all talking about here. Is someone asking a question? Maybe just background noise?
I think so, yeah. If everyone can make sure to mute, unless you have a question, then please do jump in.
Great. And Jess, feel free to interrupt me if there is a question that pops up that's relevant. So I think the easiest way to kind of wrap your head around a jurisdictional approach, and again, everyone in this call probably understands this very well, but the way we explain it to folks is really looking at the key elements you must have to make it a jurisdictional approach. And most important is that integrated landscape approach, working with across stakeholders and sectors. And you're really working to reconcile that social, economic, and environmental objective to achieve a sustainable landscape. Again, applied within a political boundary versus a landscape boundary, and then requiring that form of government engagement is the new element here. So in looking at our research, we were able to draw from the literature and from conversations with folks about what the potential benefits look like. The approach obviously promises clear benefits. Maybe most evident is its ability to respond to the shortcomings of the supply chain approaches and really address environmental and social issues at scale. The multi-stakeholder and multi-sector approach also works to really develop and establish the goals from the ground up, providing an opportunity to improve inclusivity and democratize land use planning and management. Of course, this is all when everything goes well. We're not saying every approach promises these benefits. These are the opportunity benefits, right? This also, of course, allows for the engagement of communities and smallholder populations to really take action on the issues they face, like land titling. Again, working with multiple sectors at the table allows for really improved land use planning, where stronger links between the benefits of forest conservation and management for improved commodity production can be accounted for, while being mindful of potential leakage issues as well. Similarly, engagement across sectors can better align the resources and investments, because we know these can be expensive initiatives to take on, trying to transform entire production systems. You can potentially reduce costs in the long term from certification expenses. Improved governance would ideally extend beyond political turnover to avoid that risk, and provide insurance that enable market interest and investment. In turn, government is also incentivized by increased market demand from their high-performing jurisdictions, and investment in underperforming jurisdictions can grow additional production capacity. Corporate commodity sourcing is also facilitated with transparent, consistent, and resilient supply sheds that meet the improved environmental and social criteria that companies are now looking for, ideally. Their risk is minimized because of the increased government accountability and the management of the natural resources as well. So of course, with these benefits come a number of challenges. As the approach is in its early stages and working to increase engagement and support is a challenge. I mean, we all know trying to engage companies in this is still in conversational stage many times, or exploratory. There are a small number of really successful pilots that you can point to with strong data that helps build this case. Funding can be cumbersome. These initiatives are costly, and they're often designed for implementation over longer timelines, likely requiring long-term monitoring of multiple indicators to generate that eventual long-term benefit, which can be really challenging for typical corporate ROI measures for kind of shorter term gains needs and justifying investment. Ensuring the benefits flow properly to producers and government or whoever is investing in those improvements can be difficult. The multi-stakeholder approach also often requires quite a bit of negotiation, compromise, trade-offs to establish and work towards those multiple goals that may not always be mutually reinforcing. So there's natural conflict there. Government engagement is always, of course, subject to political turnover, poor alignment across divisions, capacity and resource constraints, transparency and access to information issues. It also can incentivize movement away from underperforming jurisdictions. Of course, these goals can always be impacted and influenced by a number of external factors really outside of the control of the pilot as well. There are also risks associated with any model, like encouraging companies to shift sourcing away from an underperforming jurisdiction only to incentivize a higher performing jurisdiction. So let's take a look at the potential roles for private sector. In a lot of our conversations with the initiatives that we looked at in a kind of a focused way, they talked about the challenge of engaging the private sector. So we really wanted to take a closer look at what are the roles that private sector could play within a jurisdictional approach. And I think usually the preconception on the corporate side was that, oh, you just want money. You just want funding. This is what you're looking for. And it becomes like a conversation ender. So something we did was try to really pull apart what are all the different roles that are supportive that private sector can play to encourage jurisdictional approaches. I think navigating this looks quite different than historically corporates have encountered in trying to improve their sustainable sourcing, because you're working at a scale to transform a sector, not just clean up your purchasing, right? So again, that said, there's not just one role private sector can play to support jurisdictional approaches. There are options, and they really depend on what the company's budget, bandwidth, and need for a supply chain link is. So beginning on the left-hand side, we can see some of the lower cost and potentially lower effort support that could be provided with positive messaging around the importance of jurisdictional approaches, informing the development of relevant tools that help with the execution of a jurisdictional approach, like GFW Pro and monitoring tools. And then you're moving into activities that require a little more time and engagement. So that would be participation in the multi-stakeholder forum that's convened to move the jurisdictional approach forward. Similarly, providing any relevant technical assistance or extension services that you could provide in production areas. And then moving closer to a company's business operations, you can look at different various sourcing supports that could be offered, like commitment to off-taking the product or even a percentage of the product, to a preferential sourcing commitment, which can be support sourcing a high-performing jurisdiction or commit to an underperforming jurisdiction to really help it improve. And finally, we know these are long-term and expensive efforts to transform production at scale. So we can also see funding for pilot initiatives is also integral, of course, and technical activities as well. So as I mentioned in our research, we conducted interviews with companies along the value chain of these two sectors, the Indonesian and Malaysian palm oil sectors and Brazilian soy. So in speaking with companies about what role they could see themselves playing, we heard the following messages very clearly. Many companies saw becoming an off-taker as a jurisdictional pilot as an option. However, they were adamant that this production must comply with no deforestation commitments they've already made, like New York Declaration on Forests and NDPE or Consumer Goods Forum commitments. And equally, they needed these initiatives to help them address social criteria like smallholder land titling issues. And naturally, there was also a preference in the companies we spoke with looking for palm oil sourcing that it would be RSPO certified. Furthermore, broadly, more of the retail and consumer goods manufacturing companies thought traditional premiums would not necessarily be an option for them in supporting jurisdictional initiatives. Clearly, this sets quite a high bar for the initiatives. Next, on pilots. Many companies also recognize the need for investment in pilots and projects, but there is debate around whether this would be a philanthropic investment or it would need to offer a return if they could provide some analysis there, and if it would require a direct link to their supply chain for those that were able to make it. Finally, despite the fact that these are early conversations sometimes, there was clearly strong interest and appetite to be an early mover in the space. Almost half the companies we interviewed are currently exploring or are already engaged in a jurisdictional pilot. So moving on to our government interviews on the other side of the equation, we gained some interesting takeaways from these conversations. First, I think we are very encouraged to hear clear recognition from government of the importance of their role in moving jurisdictional approaches forward and their role in transforming how palm oil and soy are produced in Indonesia and Brazil. Some of the key challenges they described included recognition that more capacity and better coordination across government bodies, ministries, and agencies is really necessary, and that's lacking right now. Additionally, championing environmental efforts can be politically unpopular for them. It's perceived as anti-develop or anti-development, and the gains they actually could provide to production and communities are not really clearly communicated or understood. However, interestingly, more often than not, jurisdictional approaches were viewed as an opportunity to dig in and build that capacity and improve how those departments work together, as well as an opportunity to really address that political element and reinforce how environmental regulation can complement efforts to grow economic development and address key social issues. So what does that really mean for jurisdictional approaches moving forward? Obviously, it's very clear this is an incredibly promising approach. It's innovative and exciting, and it's really built on the lessons we've learned from many years of working in this space to improve how we produce agricultural commodities. There are a range of initiatives underway. Many of you are representing those initiatives. Some are more advanced than others. For the companies that we see that are ready to get involved, we really encourage them to do so. And we think there are plenty of opportunities, as we talked about before. However, we also think that it's important for companies to also continue that sustainable sourcing message outside of jurisdictional approaches and continue sending those demand signals for strongly for purchasing sustainably certified and verified commodities. And for those that are ready to make investments beyond what they're already doing, there's certainly opportunities for that. And I think I'll pause there, see if we have any questions.
Hi, it's Charlie O'Malley here. I wonder if anyone has any perspective on what a jurisdictional approach misses relative to a national approach. Obviously, in the Green Commodities program we run, we tend to lead at least with national platforms. We then may go to provincial or district. But if you go straight to a subnational focus, I'm curious, does anyone know what you miss out on by not addressing the national level from a policy and regulatory and legal point of view?
Yeah, I'd assume this for discussion with the wider group too, that folks implementing might have some input here.
Yeah, I was just scribbling that down. Oh.
Yeah, I'm guessing there are people like Andrew Bavanik who would have an answer to this question, but I don't know if anyone else on the call has.
I do, but I'm not necessarily. Oh, go for it.
Okay, no, I think it's important because you have different level of issues to be attended, When we start from the subnational level, maybe we're gonna miss some important and key issues that we have at the political level. I'm gonna put you an example. For example, when we talk about labor issues here in Costa Rica, we have a lot of things that must be solved at the national level. So try to identify that at the subnational level is going to be really difficult, you know, because there you're only going to face the consequences of the missing politics of labor, for example. So I think you lost all that component of the national level. But by the other hand, I think that if we mix both point of view, we can, our construction is going to be better, you know, because at the subnational level, and I learned that in Paraguay, you can identify that each region and each product have different kind of problems. So I think you can construct from the bottom in that sense and collect all that information and then share it and complement it at the national level. So I think in that case, Paraguay is a really good example how to mix that and avoid to miss that things at the national level.
I have a question, it's Pascal. First, there was a question in the chat for you on the stakeholder that you may want to cover, Leslie.
Yeah,
And
I think I need a clarification on
that. But my question is, when you mentioned that the jurisdictional approach is primarily trying to bring a greater government participation within the boundaries of the administrative boundaries, are you referring to local subnational government, or are you referring to national government, or are you referring to both?
Do you want me to take this, Leslie?
Sure. Sorry, it broke up a little bit there.
No, yeah, I mean, ideally both. I think the distinction at the beginning was really to help distinguish between what is the difference between a jurisdictional approach and other landscape approaches. So while we distinctly drew out those differences and said it's within a political boundary, it obviously will change depending on the situation, the country, the government, the region. We were just trying to help emphasize how you could distinguish between. So quick answer to your question is both. I think it's really to help differentiate between other landscape approaches and a jurisdictional. It is that kind of political context. And then to the question in the chat box, could you provide a bit more clarification on that as far, let me scroll up. Arabi? I know I butchered that.
You did well. You did well. Yeah, can I clarify? I mean, what I am looking for, what I was asking basically was that, so in the definition, I realized that we are saying we are focusing on stakeholder rather than social or indigenous communities. So noticing that, of course, this is also about inclusivity. I was trying to find out what kind of impact that we think that if we focus on stakeholders rather than indigenous communities, what sort of impact that would have on our ability to enhance inclusivity. And that is what I wanted to find out, if your research really was able to provide some kind of information as to whether or not by going for the stakeholder route, you were able to enhance inclusivity rather than maybe a landscape approach that would probably focus on indigenous communities.
Yeah, so just to clarify, and then Leslie, you can jump in if you have stuff to add. I think, apologies, because I think we should have distinguished that stakeholders does include communities and that local context, absolutely. That just isn't what we focused on within this research. This was more of the kind of key of the government aspect and the private sector. So that's an area that we didn't explore as much. But but it's definitely key to having, I think, true impact, because without the local context of communities engagement and either support or not support for kind of, commodity agriculture and whatnot, you can't have a truly successful landscape or jurisdictional initiative. So I don't have a direct answer to the differentiation between how one might be more impactful. It's just that this specific research didn't include that.
Okay.
Leslie, did you have any more to go over? If not, I was going to have Patrick from ISIL do a quick overview of some of his work.
Nope, that's it.
No. Okay, great.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure. Yeah, and there's plenty of time for questions after as well. Patrick's only on the call till the top of the hour.
Okay.
Ahead,
it was
Jeremy.
just, what would, if you had to select the sort of top examples of jurisdictions, the kind of best practice examples, I don't know if you might have covered this at the beginning, who you spoke to. I came late to the call, but who would you say are the best practice examples of jurisdictional work?
No problem. So we, again, in case you didn't hear, we focused on palm oil production in Indonesia and Malaysia and soy in Brazil. So we looked at initiatives, specifically the RSPO jurisdictional pilots in Central Kalimantan, South Sumatra, Sabah, and CI's initiative, the Sustainable Landscape Project in North Sumatra. And within the soy sector, we looked at the Mato Grosso and the Para initiatives as kind of strong performers. Certainly not to say there are not others that are doing great things, but just they had the elements that we were looking for to work on this research and be able to talk with them about their experiences implementing.
And are those generally considered to be the kind of the leading examples in those sectors?
I think we would put them in that box, but I don't think that's, defining of excluding others that are not high performing as well.
Thanks.
I think that also,
and I would say
the strong corporate angle too, that what we were hearing from folks was the need for RSPO certification. So that played a big role in what we looked at as well. Sorry, Jess, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say quickly, and I think, leading in the sense of kind of the most known, and this is what is being spoken about mostly in other research and as kind of these pilots that are put towards the forefront. So there's definitely others, and within other commodities and regions that we just didn't focus on. But within the research, it's within the full report, I don't know if it's in the executive summary, there's some really cool feedback as far as some of the challenges to implementation from these specific pilots that I think is a strong tie throughout, whether it's having actually everyone at the table and moving things forward, it's slow moving, or people are already to start doing preferential sourcing commitments, but there's really not a supply there. There's a lot of commonalities across these, and really kind of finding that sweet spot of how to really jump in and further along these initiatives in a constructive way is still quite challenging. But I think it's kind of nice to hear from the research what those might be. Before we run out of time, Patrick from ISIL is going to talk quickly about some of the research he did with GIZ or through GIZ. I'll let you speak to it since you know it best. But yeah, please take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Jessica, and appreciate having a couple minutes to talk about this work. I think it nicely complements the CI work. And I shared this with Jessica yesterday, just as background for this webinar. At ISIL, we work with sustainability standards, essentially trying to ensure that they continue to be relevant and effective tools in driving sustainable practices and uptake through sourcing. And so naturally, we're looking at trends and how those systems and tools need to evolve. And so landscape and jurisdictional approaches is something that we've been interested in for about 1.5 years now. And we're lucky enough to have some funding from GIZ to do research over the last 6 months, looking really at 2 different streams. One, in the first instance, how do sustainability standards need to evolve and adapt their systems to be more relevant either in delivering landscape or jurisdictional approaches or models, or contributing to existing or proposed jurisdictional approaches. And so, for example, RSPO, I think, is the leading example here from the standards side in terms of piloting a jurisdictional approach. So looking at the extent to which you can transform RSPO into an improvement-oriented standard that is adopted by jurisdictions and has a jurisdictional entity that is then focused on improving the practices of palm oil producers within that region, excuse me, to ultimately get to RSPO certification over a period of time. And I think that reflects a broader trend in sustainability standards of looking more at improvement approaches rather than pass-fail certification. And that one of the things that we found in the jurisdictional models is that they too are very much oriented to improvement approaches. So recognizing that this is about a pathway or a journey to sustainability, and how do we recognize the improvements that are made over time. And that leads us into the second half of the research, which is really looking at what would need to be in place for these jurisdictions to be credible sources of responsible or sustainable products for companies. So it's interesting that you said that the companies are looking already for RSPO certification as a component of the jurisdictions. Really what we're interested in is, if you have jurisdictions that are improving their practices over time, how do you ensure that those improvements, that the producers are benefiting from the improvements they're making even before they reach something like an external third-party certification, and what needs to be in place for those jurisdictions, for sourcing from those jurisdictions to be considered credible and rigorous. So our interest and expertise is in assurance, verification, traceability, claims, and that's where we focused our efforts to understand what types of verification practices might be required in order for companies to be able to make claims of responsible sourcing from improvements within jurisdictions. And now going forward, we have another piece of work with WWF to explore what landscape assurance verification looks like, and what the basis of that would be in order to ensure the credibility of those claims. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Jessica?
Yes.
Can
Sorry,
you unmute Pascal here? Yeah, will you allow me 30 seconds of commercial here?
Of course.
Thank you. So to all colleagues here on the line, thank you very much. I'm Pascal Fabier. I'm trying to lead the development of this community with colleagues around there. You've joined this community and we are very grateful. We hope that we will all see you in Peru next year at the Good Growth Conference. But we want this community to be different. That's why I would like you to make a special effort now and in the future to open your video. Patrick, your presentation was good, but the audio and video, some people are more visual and auditive. So I would like to ask everyone to make an effort for that in the future, because it makes a huge difference to everybody. So thanks a lot, and it will help us recognize each other when we meet. This is a small group, and I think it's good to do so. Technology allows it. Thank you. Over to you, Jessica.
Thanks. And just so you know, I would love to make my video available. Unfortunately, I temporarily disabled it, but otherwise I would have done so.
That was a commercial for everybody who can do it and is not doing it.
Don't worry, we totally understand that there's individuals who aren't able, given where they are, computers or connections. Just appreciate the effort if you are. I think I'd like to really highlight again if there's any questions specifically to either the research or the topic in general before I ask another question on the next webinar. But yeah, anything particular that stuck out to you as far as either definition, what was similar to you, issues of implementation, corporate sector feedback, government feedback, please provide that. Would love to discuss further. Pascal, I saw you waving.
Yeah, I was wondering, where do you think the international debate has landed in 2018 on this jurisdictional issue? What is the key topic of conversation now on this?
I think it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to those closer to the implementation side, or if the corporate angle, yeah, it really depends, and which sector. It's definitely spoken a bit more about probably in palm or cocoa, or more so than bananas or sugar, and commodities that it's relevant to. Would love to hear from others on this, but I think Leslie and I can speak a bit to the corporate angle after others have had a chance to share. You guys are killing me. I'm supposed to be doing a good job of making this interactive. Pascal's going to give me bad marks. So give me your feedback, your thoughts, what you think.
Be curious to know, I mean, who on this call is involved with jurisdictional initiatives or is aware of them in their territory?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, this is Maike with GIZ. I'm sorry, I had a scheduling conflict. That's why I'm late and I need to leave early. Hi, Pascal, sorry.
It's okay.
So yes, we are involved with jurisdictions. We have 2 jurisdictional approaches, one in Indonesia and one in Cote d'Ivoire. So I missed the beginning question, but just to say that, yes, we are involved, and I'm happy to answer the next question if there was one.
I think the question specifically...
Sorry, Maike.
Go ahead,
one of the question was, what are the? I was interested. What is the, from the perspective, your perspective as GIZ? Where is the debate raging now on jurisdictional approach in 2018? What is the key frontier issue discussed about this?
Well, I think we are still quite, despite the, I mean, maybe Conservation International, I mean, I think we are a bit in a similar process. So we've been in this for, when did we start? March last year, so 1.5 years. And within 1.5 years, you do not reach everything and you cannot create an entire sustainable region. So there are processes going on asking, how do you define a sustainable region? What is that? What are the criteria? I think that's an important process that has started. That is something where we are going to contribute. And then very much looking at what is I think our approach would be to start with a governance structure. So I think there's also a debate to be had about what are approaches that function and some that don't function. So what have we seen when we, let's say, when we start with smallholders only? How is that? Well, we might start that in a jurisdiction, but that is not in about itself a jurisdictional approach. So I think there are discussions to be had on what is the most effective way, but also, I guess, as always, there's not a one size fits all answer, because it depends also on the region, on the political environment, on the commodities and stakeholders. So we are really entering into quite a difficult topic. And the other thing is then, how do we take companies with us? I think that's another one. When they say they want to source from sustainable regions, what is their commitment to certain regions? Have we seen companies that have made commitments to saying, you know what, our palm oil will always come from West Kalimantan or something? So I think we're still in the very middle of it. At least that's what I can say about our projects. We see some things that work better than others, but we're also aware of that we have two different political environments and stakeholder environments. So that's why I very much appreciate an exchange like this. Yes.
Thank you. So I think just to add quickly, Pascal, from some of the research on specific jurisdictions, two things kind of stick out to me, and these were also in side conversations at, I think during TFA, was that, you know, in year one you have, yay, jurisdictional approaches, we're super interested, what is this concept? Year two, okay, what's going on with this jurisdiction? Year three, people have moved on to the next hot topic. So there's excitement, but there's a lack of kind of patience around the complexity of what actually goes into this sort of initiative that really truly is multi-stakeholder across governments and so forth. And then an additional one was that oftentimes you have the end product being, all right, we'll preferentially source from this. So if you want a company to do that, but you have these landscapes saying, we're not here for that. We definitely want investments and additional work, but we just don't have the supply. So how can you help us get to that supply, and how do we get to that point when we're then ready? So it's kind of everybody wants to go from A to Z without thinking of all the in between. That's from more of the implementing side of the research that we heard. The corporates, I think it's still kind of the standstill of how to engage, and that's why we really kind of honed in on that during our research. Was to identify maybe some different steps along the way. That slide with the arrow really kind of tries to point out the key aspects as to how a company might engage from, you know, a pledge of support, which doesn't necessarily do a whole lot, to investments across the board, or to preferential sourcing when there is a supply. So I think there's still quite a standstill anticipation, but hopefully not a lack of interest that because it's taking a bit of time.
Thank you. Jessica, am I allowed one last question to someone else?
Sure.
I would like to ask a question to Jairo. Jairo, can you hear me? Yeah? Yeah, I'm interested because you've been working at the national level and the subnational level, right?
Yep.
And we've seen some of the challenges at the jurisdictional level to bring some more national perspective. But what do you think the jurisdictional approach add that to what we find difficult to do at the national level? So what are the advantages on the jurisdictional multi-stakeholder engagement compared to what we usually do at the national level? What's your experience of it?
Okay, first, thank you for the presentation. I think they have been really interesting to put some pieces together inside my mind. In our experience, I think the jurisdictional approach may give us the tool towards the implementation of the plans that we develop. So I think in this way, we can take all the agreements that we can get dialogue process that we develop in the national platform and put it in clear actions, you know, because mainly most of the actions are related with the ministries, you know, but also they have a lot to do with the local government, because here in our example, the local governments are in charge to make all the land space planning that is necessary to develop a single region. So I think this approach could give us, you know, that clues to the implementation stage, because most of our process has been developed, you know, under the development of the action plan. But next, we need to put out our sleeves and go to the field. So I think this approach can give us that, you know, the way to implement.
Okay. Great.
Also, I just have a mixed question, because I hear, I'm gonna take this chance, that this approach involves the buyers and different levels in the life cycle of a product. But I have a question: how you involve, or if you then identify the role of the banks? Because most of the money to improve this supply chain comes from the buyers, but the other rest of the money comes from the banks. So I just want to know if you have any experience in that from the research that you developed.
Sure. We didn't actually look into the role of the financial institution, because we just had to kind of scope it somewhere. But that's a great question. There's definitely a role there. We just had to put some parameters on our research. I think there's plenty that could be looked into there, because it could be very interesting. Jessica, I don't know if you have anything from your experience to add.
No, other than the fact that it's quite the missing piece at this point. I think with a lot of sustainability work, the finance sector is somewhat late to the game, or just we haven't engaged them as strong as we have within the market space. And so I think, hi Charlie. I think that ideally it'd be really good to unpack that. I know, like within kind of other projects that we're working on in CI, it's really trying to leverage how to bring in large funds like Ant Green Fund or other funds that help kind of get into that aspect, because ultimately you're having finance impact things from buying and whatnot to the loans for farmers who are within that context. So unpacking that would be really helpful. Sorry, we can't answer your question. Maybe next time. I think it might be good for a second webinar though. And this is something that, I think to pivot a little bit is what would be helpful for a second webinar. Is it understanding a little bit more of the finance dynamic, having some guests come in and speak to that, us really unpacking that through, some 2 key geographies or whatnot. Your thoughts are really helpful here.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, any other questions on the specific research or the topic, or I think I'd like to shift a bit. We don't have to stay on till 10:30 by any means, but if anyone has suggestions for the second webinar, this is something I'd really like to hear from you all. And if I don't hear now, we'll be bugging you an email, so.
I would be interested in hearing effective ways to engage with governments on jurisdiction. I mean, on increasing sustainability in a landscape, and how is this taken up by governments, and generally how do we get governments involved in increasing sustainability in supply chains, or on farm level and the entire jurisdiction.
Thank you. Others?
Yeah, I think
finance and government. Go ahead.
Hi, I think linked to that, the sustainability issue, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in Ghana currently with the integrated landscape approaches has been the issue of financial sustainability, especially when these are being done with the help of communities. How do they continue to maintain financial sustainability? Most of these things are started by, UNDP or maybe Mondelez or some companies like that. But then there's a time span to their involvement. So after they leave by initiating this, how do they sustain this financially? And that has been a challenge for a lot of these approaches. So it will be great to know maybe from other jurisdictions what has worked and probably how that can be replicated in other areas.
That's a topic I would also support. Have a positive list of good experiences. Yes, best practice.
I have an interest or question. I think I'm curious to learn or find out what would be the acceptable trade-off between the systemic inclusion that is required in the jurisdictional approach, which means high level of complexity, and the objective that we are trying to pursue. We at UNDP, working at the national and the landscape level, we see the complexity of the multi-stakeholder engagement at the national level, the time it takes, the management of it. And we're talking about a national output, a national outcome. I can imagine a similar complexity at the jurisdictional approach of multi-stakeholder engagement, but for a lesser potential output. So I'm interested in what would be an acceptable trade-off to reduce this complexity, which I think is a source of some of the challenge faced by the approach. So finding the right boundaries about systemic inclusion versus reaching an outcome.
To push you a bit on that, who do you think ultimately is responsible for deciding that trade-off? Where does that lie, and how do you get to that?
I think is just a conversation to see. It's like in all processes, you tend to load all those participatory process with all the stakeholders at the right time, and you end up with something that is utterly complicated and unachievable. So the question is, what is absolutely essential? And I think it can only be achieved through dialogue, through an ongoing discussion with the people based on experience, to come to say, you know, there is a hierarchy of priorities in this jurisdictional approach, and these are the top priorities and top inclusion factors, and these are of lesser. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we are going to see very little progress due to the inherent complexity. So I think, Jessica, I think a dialogue like this one that could culminate in Peru in 2019 may just be a nice place to see whether we are reaching shared understanding about this.
Great, thanks, Pascal. I'll save that one for Peru.
Hello, this is Christian. I would also like to feed into this, and I would be interesting for further webinars into sort of like practical examples of functioning multi-stakeholder platforms. Because as far as I learned and understood, like multi-stakeholder dialogue and platforms is sort of like an essential part, theoretical part of a jurisdictional approach. And are there any like working examples or practical examples for multi-stakeholder platforms?
Great, thank you, Christian.
I think Costa Rica may be a good example to share.
Costa Rica, okay.
For us.
In Costa
No pressure.
No pressure, Jairo.
Great, and we did toy around with the idea of having a specific jurisdictional kind of guest join us, whether from Saba or Kalimantan or whatnot, but we wanted to really help set the foundation first before jumping into a specific example. So that's definitely something we've looked at and happy to kind of think through, but also unpack whether it's a platform in Costa Rica or I know something we've been doing a little bit for some corporate thinking is looking at other things like FIPS, Fishery Improvement Projects. So how to learn from other sectors that are doing stuff, whether it's specific jurisdictional or not. All right. Any others?
I think, Jessica, I think there is a natural link with another thematic streams, which is around the linkages between the subnational and the national level work. And I think there is here dots to be connected between this learning inquiry that you're leading and the other that will be started a bit later on.
Great. Well, I won't make everyone sit for another 15 minutes. I appreciate you joining. If you have questions on anything we covered, always available. Shoot me an email. Happy to do a call as well. And then we will be in touch as far as second webinars. And then we also will send out our executive summary to the research that we completed. So big thanks to Leslie for joining in and presenting. She really steered a lot of that research. And big thanks to everybody for taking the time to sit through it. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.